the Mary Celeste, the ghost ship of the Atlantic, in the vast, unforgiving expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, where the waves rise like mountains, and the sky can turn from calm blue to roiling gray in a matter of minutes. There exists a legend that has haunted mariners, historians, and storytellers for over a century and a half. It is the legend of the Mary Celeste, a ship that sailed into the annals of maritime history, not for its speed, its cargo, or its crew, but for the eerie mystery that surrounds its fate. A mystery so profound that it has earned it the title of the ghost ship of the Atlantic, unlike other maritime disasters that can be explained by storms, collisions, or human error. The Mary Celeste remains an enigma, a vessel that was found adrift, intact, and fully provisioned, yet entirely abandoned by its crew and passengers, with no sign of struggle, no message of distress, and no clue as to where its people vanished. For 157 years, researchers, historians, and conspiracy theorists have pored over the facts, debated the possibilities, and spun countless tales about what might have befallen the Mary Celeste and its crew. But no single explanation has ever been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. The ship has become a symbol of the unknown dangers of the sea, a reminder that even in an age of advanced technology, the ocean still holds secrets that defy understanding. To truly grasp the enduring fascination of the Mary Celeste, we must journey back to its origins, trace its final voyage, examine the chilling details of its discovery, and explore the countless theories that have been proposed to solve its mystery. This is the story of the Mary Celeste, the ghost ship that refuses to be forgotten, the enigma that continues to captivate the world, and a testament to the power of the unknown to haunt our imaginations. The Mary Celeste was not always known by that name, nor was it built to be a vessel of mystery. Its story begins in 1861 in the shipyards of Spencer's Island, Nova Scotia, Canada, where it was constructed by the shipbuilder Joshua Dewey's for a local merchant named William Henry Briggs. Originally christened the Amazon, the ship was a brigantine, a two-masted sailing vessel with square sails on the foremast and fore and aft sails on the mainmast, measuring 99 feet in length, 25 feet in breadth, and 11 feet in depth, with a tonnage of 198 tons. It was a sturdy, well-built ship, designed for the rough waters of the Atlantic, capable of carrying a substantial cargo and enduring the harshest of storms. The Amazon's first captain was Robert McClellan, a seasoned mariner with years of experience navigating the Atlantic, and its first voyage began in June 1861, bound for Liverpool, England, with a cargo of lumber. However, tragedy struck almost immediately. Captain McClellan fell ill during the voyage and died on July 12, 1861, just days before the Amazon reached Liverpool. His body was buried at sea, and the ship was left in the hands of its first mate, who successfully guided it to its destination. This early misfortune would prove to be a harbinger of the ship's troubled history, as if the Amazon was cursed from the very beginning. The crew later reported that during the voyage, strange things had happened. Tools went missing, the ship's compass malfunctioned, and several crew members complained of an unexplained sense of unease. While these could easily be dismissed as the result of fatigue and the stress of losing their captain, they would later become part of the growing legend of the ship's supposed curse. After its first voyage, the Amazon changed hands several times, passing through the ownership of various merchants and captains, and each time it seemed to attract misfortune. In 1863, it ran aground off the coast of Cape Breton Island, Nova Scotia, sustaining significant damage to its hull. The ship was stranded for weeks, and by the time it was salvaged, it had suffered extensive water damage, requiring costly repairs. The owner at the time, a merchant named John Nutting, decided to sell the ship, hoping to cut his losses. It was purchased by a group of investors who spent over $10,000 on repairs, an enormous sum in the 1860s, and renamed the Mary Celeste in 1868 by its new owner, Richard Haynes, a merchant from New York City. The name change was intended to give the ship a fresh start, to distance it from its troubled past. But it would soon become clear that no name change could erase the shadow that hung over the vessel. Under Haynes' ownership, the Mary Celeste made several successful voyages, carrying cargoes of coal, grain, and other goods between ports in the United States, Europe, and the Caribbean. For a time, it seemed that the ship had finally shaken its bad luck, but this would prove to be only a temporary reprieve. In 1870, Haynes sold the Mary Celeste to a group of investors led by James H. Winchester, a prominent New York businessman who planned to use the ship to transport cargo between New York and the Mediterranean. Winchester appointed Benjamin S. Briggs as the ship's new captain, a decision that would ultimately lead to the Mary Celeste's place in history. Winchester later recalled that he had chosen Briggs not only for his experience, but also for his reputation as a cautious and reliable mariner, someone who could be trusted with a valuable cargo and a crew. Captain Benjamin Spooner Briggs was a man of impeccable reputation, a seasoned mariner with over 20 years of experience at sea. Born in Wareham, Massachusetts, in 1835, Briggs had spent his entire adult life on the ocean, starting as a cabin boy and working his way up to captain. He was known for his caution, his skill, and his dedication to his crew and his family. At the time he took command of the Mary Celeste, Briggs was 37 years old, married to Sarah Elizabeth Briggs, with 2 young children, a daughter, Sophia Matilda, aged 7, and a son, Arthur Stanley, aged 2. Briggs was a devout Christian, and he was known to read the Bible to his crew every Sunday. He was also a shrewd businessman, and he had invested heavily in the Mary Celeste, hoping to make a profit from its voyages. When he accepted the position of captain, he made the unusual decision to bring his wife and children along on the ship's next voyage. a decision that would later add to the tragedy and mystery of the Mary Celeste's fate. Briggs later explained to friends that he wanted his family to experience the adventure of sea travel, and that he believed the voyage to Genoa would be relatively safe. With calm seas and a light cargo, he assembled a crew of 7 men, all experienced sailors, to accompany him on the voyage. First Mate Albert G. Richardson, Second Mate Andrew Gilling, Cook Edward Head, and Seamen John Wright, Thomas Bosel, Charles Lund, and William Thompson. Each of these men had a family waiting for them back home, and none of them would ever be seen or heard from again. Richardson, the first mate, was a 28-year-old from Maine who had sailed with Briggs on previous voyages and was known for his calm demeanor and quick thinking. Gilling, the second mate, was a 25-year-old from England with experience in Mediterranean waters, which made him a valuable addition to the crew. Head, the cook, was a 40-year-old with a reputation for preparing hearty meals, which was crucial for keeping the crew healthy during long voyages. The seamen were all experienced, with years of experience navigating the Atlantic, and were considered reliable and hardworking. The Mary Celeste's final voyage began on November 7, 1872, when it departed New York Harbor, bound for Genoa, Italy, with a cargo of 1,701 barrels of denatured alcohol, an extremely flammable liquid used for industrial purposes. The alcohol was stored in wooden barrels, each weighing approximately 50 gallons, and was valued at over $35,000, a substantial cargo for the time. The weather was clear and calm that day, with a light breeze blowing from the north, and the ship was in perfect condition, fully provisioned with enough food and water to last the crew and the Briggs family for 6 months. The provisions included salted meat, flour, biscuits, dried fruit, and fresh water stored in wooden casks, as well as medical supplies and tools for repairing the ship. The Mary Celeste was seen leaving New York Harbor by several witnesses, including the captain of another ship, the Dei Gratia, which was also bound for Genoa. The Dei Gratia was captained by David Morehouse, a close friend of Benjamin Briggs, and the two captains had agreed to keep in touch during their voyage, planning to meet up in Genoa once they had both arrived. Morehouse later recalled that he had spoken to Briggs before their departure, and Briggs had seemed in good spirits, excited about the voyage and confident that it would be a successful one. No one on board the Mary Celeste that day could have known that this would be the last time they would be seen by anyone on land, or that their ship would soon become one of the most famous mysteries in maritime history. As the Mary Celeste sailed out of New York Harbor, several onlookers noted that the ship looked sturdy and well prepared, with all its sails set, and the crew going about their duties in an orderly fashion. For the first 2 weeks of the voyage, the Mary Celeste made steady progress across the Atlantic, sailing southeast toward the Azores, a group of islands located roughly halfway between New York and Genoa. The weather remained favorable, with with mild winds and calm seas, and there were no reports of any problems on board. The crew kept a detailed logbook, recording the ship's position, the weather conditions, and the daily activities on board. According to the logbook, the crew was in good spirits, and the Briggs family was settling into life on the ship. Sarah Briggs spent her days sewing and caring for the children, while the children played on the deck, exploring the ship and watching the ocean. Captain Briggs spent his days navigating the ship, checking the cargo, and overseeing the crew's work. On November 25, 1872, the Mary Celeste was sighted by the British brigantine Agnes, which was sailing from Liverpool to Boston. The captain of the Agnes, John Boynton, later reported that the Mary Celeste appeared to be sailing normally, with all its sails set, and that there was no sign of distress. Boynton also noted that he saw several people on board the ship, including a woman and a child, presumably Sarah Briggs, and her children, standing on the deck, waving. This would be the last confirmed sighting of the Mary Celeste, with its crew on board. After that, the ship vanished into the vastness of the Atlantic, leaving no trace of its whereabouts for over a month. The crew of the Agnes later reported that the Mary Celeste was sailing at a steady pace, with no indication that anything was wrong, and that the crew seemed to be going about their normal duties. On December 4, 1872, the Dei Gratia, captained by David Morehouse, was sailing approximately 400 miles east of the Azores when one of its crew members, John Johnson, spotted a ship in the distance, adrift and seemingly abandoned. At first, Morehouse thought the ship might be the Mary Celeste, but he was hesitant to approach, as it appeared to be in distress. As the Dei Gratia drew closer, the crew could see that the ship was indeed the Mary Celeste. They recognized its distinctive hull and sails, which had been painted a unique shade of gray. What they saw next would chill them to the bone. The Mary Celeste was adrift, with its sails partially set and torn, its hull intact, and no sign of any people on board. There was no distress signal, no lifeboats visible, and no evidence of a struggle. Morehouse ordered his crew to board the Mary Celeste to investigate, and what they found on board only deepened the mystery. The boarding party, led by First Mate Oliver DeVoe, climbed aboard the Mary Celeste and was immediately struck by the eerie silence that surrounded the ship. There was no sound of voices, no creaking of ropes from crew members adjusting the sails, no smell of cooking from the galley, nothing but the sound of the waves lapping against the hull and the wind whistling through the rigging. When the crew of the Dei Gratia boarded the Mary Celeste, they were greeted by an eerie silence. The ship was completely empty, but it was not in disarray. The cabins were neat and tidy, with the crew's personal belongings, clothing, books, and personal items still in their places. The captain's cabin was particularly well maintained. Benjamin Briggs' Bible was open on the table, with a pair of spectacles resting on its pages, as if he had been reading it just moments before. Sarah Briggs' sewing machine was set up in the cabin, with a piece of fabric still on the needle, and the children's toys were scattered on the floor, as if they had been playing and suddenly left. A half-finished letter from Sarah to her mother was found on a desk, its ink still slightly damp, suggesting that she had been writing it shortly before the crew vanished. The ship's cargo hold was intact, with all 1,701 barrels of denatured alcohol still on board, though later inspection would reveal that 9 of the barrels were empty, their contents having leaked out. The leak was later determined to have been caused by a faulty seam in the barrels, which had allowed the alcohol to seep out slowly. The ship's provisions were fully stocked. There was enough food and water to last the crew for months, and the ship's water tanks were full. The navigation instruments were all present and in working order, including the ship's compass, chronometer, and logbook. The last entry in the logbook was dated November 25, 1872. The same day, the Mary Celeste was sighted by the Agnes, and it recorded the ship's position as 37 degrees 11 north latitude and 25 degrees 1 west longitude, roughly 400 miles west of the Azores. There was no mention of any trouble, no indication of a storm, and no explanation for why the crew would have abandoned the ship. The logbook entry was written in Captain Briggs' distinctive handwriting, and it was clear that he had been in a calm state of mind when he wrote it. The crew of the Dei Gratia searched every inch of the Mary Celeste, hoping to find some clue as to what had happened to its crew and passengers, but they found nothing. There were no bloodstains, no signs of a fight, no damage to the hull that would suggest a collision or a storm. The lifeboats were still on board, though one of them was missing, leading some to speculate that the crew had abandoned the ship in the lifeboat. But why would they do so when the ship was intact and fully provisioned? The missing lifeboat was a small 10-foot wooden boat that was typically used for emergency evacuations, and it was stored on the starboard side of the ship. The crew of the Dei Gratia found a rope hanging over the side of the ship, which appeared to have been used by someone to climb down into the lifeboat. But there was no sign of where the lifeboat had gone. The ship's pumps were in working order, and there was no water in the hold, so there was no threat of sinking. The only unusual thing the crew found was a small amount of water in the cabin area, which was likely the result of a minor leak, but nothing that would have posed a danger to the crew. The crew of the Dei Gratia also noticed that the ship's clock had stopped, and the compass was broken, pointing in the wrong direction. But these could have been the result of the ship adrift for weeks, not a sign of distress. Additionally, the ship's anchor was missing, which suggested that the crew had weighed anchor before abandoning the ship. But there was no explanation for why they would have done so. Captain Morehouse was perplexed by what he found. He knew Benjamin Briggs well, and he knew that Briggs was a cautious and experienced captain who would never abandon his ship unless there was an immediate and life-threatening danger. Morehouse also knew that Briggs would never leave his wife and children behind, especially in a lifeboat in the middle of the Atlantic. The only logical conclusion was that something catastrophic had happened to the crew, but there was no evidence of what that could be. Morehouse decided to tow the Mary Celeste to Gibraltar, where he could report the discovery to the British authorities and claim salvage rights for his crew. The journey to Gibraltar took 11 days, and during that time, the crew of the Dei Gratia continued to search the Mary Celeste for clues, but they found nothing new. They also made repairs to the ship's sails and rigging to ensure that it could be safely towed. When they arrived in Gibraltar on December 15, 1872, news of the abandoned ship spread quickly, and the Mary Celeste became an international sensation. Reporters from around the world flocked to Gibraltar to cover the story, and people everywhere were fascinated by the mystery of the ghost ship. The British authorities immediately launched an investigation, and the Mary Celeste was docked in Gibraltar Harbor, where it was examined by experts from the Royal Navy. The British authorities in Gibraltar launched an official investigation into the Mary Celeste's fate, led by Frederick Solly Flood, the Attorney General of Gibraltar. Solly Flood was a meticulous and thorough investigator, and he was determined to uncover the truth about what had happened to the Mary Celeste and its crew. He interviewed the crew of the Dei Gratia, examined the Mary Celeste in detail, and reviewed the ship's logbook and other documents. The investigation lasted for several months, and during that time, Solly Flood considered a wide range of possible explanations for the crew's disappearance. One of the first theories he explored was that the crew had been murdered by the crew of the Dei Gratia, who had then staged the scene to make it look like the Mary Celeste had been abandoned in order to claim the salvage rights. This theory was fueled by the fact that the Dei Gratia's crew stood to gain a great deal of money from the salvage, roughly $46,000, which was a substantial sum in 1872. However, there was no evidence to support this theory. The crew of the Dei Gratia had no motive to murder the Briggs family and the Mary Celeste's crew, and there were no signs of violence on board the Mary Celeste. Additionally, the crew of the Dei Gratia had a good reputation, and many people testified to their honesty and integrity. Solly Flood eventually dismissed this theory, concluding that the crew of the Dei Gratia was innocent. He later stated that there was no evidence to suggest that the crew of the Dei Gratia had any involvement in the disappearance of the Mary Celeste's crew. Another theory that Solly Flood considered was that the crew had abandoned the ship because of a fire or an explosion caused by the denatured alcohol in the cargo hold. Denatured alcohol is highly flammable, and if even a small amount of it had leaked, it could have created a dangerous situation. The fact that 9 barrels of alcohol were empty suggested that there had been a leak, and perhaps the crew had feared that the alcohol would catch fire or explode, forcing them to abandon the ship in a hurry. However, there was no evidence of a fire or an explosion on board the Mary Celeste. The cargo hold was intact. There were no burn marks, and the ship's hull was not damaged. Additionally, if the crew had feared an explosion, they would have taken their personal belongings with them, but all of their items were still on board. Solly Flood also noted that the crew would have had time to send a distress signal if they had been facing an immediate threat from fire or explosion, but there was no such signal. This theory was also dismissed, though it would later be revisited by other researchers. Solly Flood noted that the denatured alcohol on board was mixed with other chemicals that made it less volatile, and that a leak would have produced a strong odor that the crew would have detected long before any danger of explosion. Solly Flood also considered the possibility that the crew had been swept overboard by a sudden storm or a rogue wave. The Atlantic Ocean is known for its unpredictable weather, and a sudden storm could have overwhelmed the ship, sweeping the crew into the sea before they had a chance to react. However, there was no evidence of a storm having passed through the area where the Mary Celeste was found. The ship's sails were torn, but not in a way that suggested a severe storm, and the hull was intact. Additionally, the logbook of the Mary Celeste had no entries indicating that the ship had encountered rough weather, and the Agnes, which had sighted the Mary Celeste on November 25, had reported calm seas. If a storm had swept the crew overboard, it would have also likely damaged the ship, but the Mary Celeste was in almost perfect condition. This theory was also dismissed. Solly Flood consulted with meteorologists, who confirmed that there had been no severe storms in the area around the Azores between November 25 and December 4, 1872, which further supported the conclusion that a storm was not responsible for the crew's disappearance. Other theories considered during the investigation included piracy, mutiny, and even abduction by extraterrestrials. Piracy was a common concern in the Atlantic in the 19th century, but there was no evidence of piracy on board the Mary Celeste. The cargo was intact, and there were no signs of a struggle. Pirates typically steal valuable cargo and leave behind evidence of their presence, such as broken locks or damaged cabins, but none of these were found on the Mary Celeste. Mutiny was also possible, but the crew of the Mary Celeste was made up of experienced sailors who had worked together before, and there was no indication of any conflict between them. Captain Briggs was well liked by his crew, and he paid them fairly, which made a mutiny unlikely. The theory of extraterrestrial abduction was not taken seriously by Solly Flood, as it was considered too far-fetched for a formal investigation. After months of investigation, Solly Flood was forced to conclude that he could not determine what had happened to the Mary Celeste's crew. In his final report, he stated that the crew had abandoned the ship in a state of panic for reasons unknown, and that their fate would likely never be known. The Mary Celeste was eventually sold at auction in Gibraltar for $1,700, a fraction of its original value, and it continued to sail under new ownership, but it would never escape the shadow of its mysterious past. The new owner, a merchant named John P. Parker, renamed the ship the Mary Celeste II, but the name change did little to shake its reputation as a ghost ship. In the years following the investigation, the Mary Celeste's mystery only grew, as more and more theories were proposed to explain the crew's disappearance. One of the most popular theories was that the crew had been killed by toxic fumes from the denatured alcohol. Denatured alcohol contains methanol, which is highly toxic, and if the alcohol had leaked into the cargo hold, it could have released fumes that overwhelmed the crew, causing them to become disoriented and abandon the ship. This theory was supported by the fact that 9 barrels of alcohol were empty, and it was suggested that the crew had opened the hatches to ventilate the cargo hold, but the fumes had still overcome them. However, there was no evidence that the crew had been exposed to toxic fumes. There were no signs of illness or death on board the ship, and the crew's personal belongings were still in their places, suggesting that they had left the ship voluntarily. Additionally, methanol fumes are not strong enough to cause immediate disorientation, and the crew would have had time to react if they had been exposed to them. Researchers later conducted experiments with denatured alcohol and found that the fumes would not have been strong enough to overwhelm a healthy crew, even if there had been a significant leak. This theory was further discredited by the fact that the cargo hold was well ventilated, which would have allowed any fumes to escape quickly. Another popular theory was that the crew had encountered a waterspout, a tornado-like column of water that forms over the ocean. Waterspouts are rare, but they can be extremely powerful, and if one had struck the Mary Celeste, it could have swept the crew overboard or forced them to abandon the ship. However, there was no evidence of a waterspout having passed through the area. The ship's hull was intact, and there were no signs of damage from a waterspout. Additionally, the logbook of the Mary Celeste had no entries indicating that the ship had encountered a waterspout, and the Agnes had reported calm seas on November 25. This theory was also widely dismissed. Meteorologists noted that waterspouts are most common in tropical waters, and the area where the Mary Celeste was found is not a typical location for waterspouts. Furthermore, a waterspout would have caused significant damage to the ship's rigging and sails. But the damage found on the Mary Celeste was minimal and consistent with normal wear and tear. A more elaborate theory was proposed by the author Arthur Conan Doyle, who later became famous for creating the character Sherlock Holmes. In 1884, Conan Doyle published a short story titled J. Habakkuk Jeffson's Statement, which was loosely based on the Mary Celeste mystery. In the story, the crew of the Mary Celeste is killed by a group of former slaves who are hiding on board the ship, seeking revenge for their past mistreatment. While Conan Doyle's story was purely fictional, it sparked widespread interest in the Mary Celeste mystery and led many people to believe that the crew had been murdered by stowaways. However, there was no evidence of stowaways on board the Mary Celeste. The ship was thoroughly searched by the crew of the Dei Gratia, and no one was found hiding on board. Additionally, there were no signs of a struggle, which would have been likely if there had been a confrontation between the crew and stowaways. Despite this, Conan Doyle's story helped to cement the Mary Celeste's reputation as a ghost ship, and it remains one of the most famous works of fiction inspired by the mystery. Conan Doyle later admitted that he had taken significant artistic license with the story, but he stated that he was inspired by the real-life mystery and wanted to explore the darker possibilities of what could have happened. In the early 20th century, new theories emerged based on advances in maritime technology and a better understanding of the ocean. One theory suggested that the Mary Celeste had been hit by a seaquake, a sudden disturbance in the ocean floor that can cause large waves and strong currents. A seaquake could have caused the ship to roll violently, making the crew fear that it would sink and forcing them to abandon it. However, there was no evidence of a seaquake in the area where the Mary Celeste was found, and the ship's hull was not damaged. Seismologists later confirmed that there had been no significant seismic activity in the Atlantic Ocean around the Azores during the time of the Mary Celeste's voyage. Another theory suggested that the crew had been attacked by a school of sharks, but there were no bloodstains or other evidence of a shark attack on board the ship. Sharks typically leave distinctive bite marks or bloodstains, but none of these were found during the investigation. Yet, another theory suggested that the crew had been abducted by pirates who had then abandoned the ship. But again, there was no evidence of piracy. The cargo was intact, and there were no signs of a struggle. Pirates would have also taken valuable items from the crew, but all of their personal belongings were still on board. In the 1960s, a new theory was proposed by the marine archaeologist Dr. William P. Magines, who conducted a detailed analysis of the Mary Celeste's cargo and the conditions on board the ship. Dr. Magines argued that the denatured alcohol in the cargo hold had leaked, and that the crew had opened the hatches to ventilate the hold, causing the ship to lose stability and begin to list. The crew, fearing that the ship would sink, had abandoned it in the lifeboat, but the lifeboat had capsized in the rough seas, killing everyone on board. This theory was supported by the fact that 9 barrels of alcohol were empty and that the ship's hatches were open when it was found. Dr. Magines also noted that the Mary Celeste's hull was slightly damaged, which could have been caused by the ship listing and hitting the water. However, there was no evidence that the ship had listed significantly, and the crew would have had time to send a distress signal if they had feared the ship would sink. Additionally, the lifeboat was missing, but there was no evidence that it had capsized. Dr. Magines conducted experiments with a scale model of the Mary Celeste and found that opening the hatches would not have caused the ship to list significantly, which weakened his theory. He also noted that the crew was experienced enough to handle a slight list and would not have abandoned the ship without good reason. In the 1980s, another theory was proposed by the historian Brian Hicks, who wrote a book titled The Mary Celeste, The Greatest Mystery of the Sea. Hicks argued that the crew of the Mary Celeste had abandoned the ship because of a false alarm. They had believed that the ship was taking on water, when in fact it was not. Hicks noted that the Mary Celeste's pumps were in working order, but that the crew may have misread the water gauge, leading them to believe that the hold was filling with water. fearing that the ship would sink, the crew had abandoned it in the lifeboat, but the lifeboat had drifted away, and the crew had died at sea. This theory was supported by the fact that the ship's water tanks were full, and that there was no water in the hold. However, there was no evidence that the crew had misread the water gauge, and it seems unlikely that a group of experienced sailors would abandon a perfectly good ship based on a false alarm. Hicks also suggested that the crew may have been inexperienced, but historical records show that all of the crew members had years of experience at sea and were familiar with the ship's systems. Additionally, the water gauge on the Mary Celeste was easy to read, and it is unlikely that multiple crew members would have misread it at the same time. In recent years, advances in technology have allowed researchers to revisit the Mary Celeste mystery with new tools and techniques. In 2001, a team of marine archaeologists led by Dr. Margaret Rule, who was famous for discovering the wreck of the Mary Rose, conducted a detailed study of the Mary Celeste's history and the evidence from the scene. Dr. Rule's team concluded that the most likely explanation for the crew's disappearance was that the denatured alcohol had leaked, creating a flammable vapor that the crew had detected. Fearing an explosion, the crew had abandoned the ship in the lifeboat, taking only their essential belongings, and had planned to wait for help. However, the lifeboat had drifted away, and the crew had died at sea, either from exposure, starvation, or drowning. Dr. Rule's team noted that the 9 empty barrels of alcohol were likely the source of the leak, and that the crew had opened the hatches to ventilate the cargo hold, which would have allowed the vapor to escape. They also noted that the rope hanging over the side of the ship was likely used by the crew to climb down into the lifeboat. While this theory is plausible, it still lacks concrete evidence, and it does not explain why the crew left their personal belongings behind, or why there was no distress signal. Dr. Rule's team also noted that the crew may have been in a state of panic, which would explain why they left their personal belongings behind. But there is no evidence to support this claim. Another recent theory was proposed by the oceanographer Dr. Simon Boxall, who suggested that the Mary Celeste had been caught in a rare weather phenomenon known as a microburst. A microburst is a sudden, powerful downdraft of air that can cause strong winds and large waves, even in calm weather. Dr. Boxall argued that a microburst had struck the Mary Celeste, causing the ship to roll violently and making the crew fear for their lives. The crew had abandoned the ship in the lifeboat, but the microburst had capsized the lifeboat, killing everyone on board. Dr. Boxall noted that the Mary Celeste's sails were torn, which could have been caused by the strong winds from the microburst, and that the ship's compass was broken, which could have been caused by the sudden movement of the ship. However, there was no evidence of a microburst in the area, and the ship's hull was not damaged, which would have been likely if it had been hit by a powerful downdraft. Meteorologists have also noted that microbursts are rare over the open ocean, and that they typically last for only a few minutes. which would not have given the crew enough time to abandon the ship. Additionally, the damage to the sails was minimal and consistent with normal wear and tear, not the powerful winds of a microburst. Despite all these theories, the Mary Celeste's mystery remains unsolved. No trace of the crew or the missing lifeboat has ever been found, and no one has ever come forward with information about what happened to them. The ship itself continued to sail for several more years, but it was plagued by bad luck. In 1885, it ran aground off the coast of Haiti, and it was salvaged and sold again. The new owner, a merchant named William Thompson, tried to rename the ship the Amazon II, but the name change did little to improve its luck. In 1889, it was deliberately sunk off the coast of Cuba by its owner, who was trying to collect insurance money. The owner, a man named George Parker, was later arrested and charged with insurance fraud, but he was acquitted due to lack of evidence. Wreck of the Mary Celeste was discovered in 2001 by a team of marine archaeologists, but it was in such poor condition that it provided no new clues about the crew's disappearance. The wreck was located off the coast of Cuba at a depth of approximately 1,000 feet, and it had been badly damaged by corrosion and marine life. The archaeologists were able to recover a few artifacts, including a wooden plank with the ship's name carved into it, but nothing that shed light on the crew's fate. Today, the Mary Celeste is remembered as one of the greatest mysteries in maritime history, a ghost ship that continues to haunt our imaginations. The Mary Celeste's legacy extends far beyond its mysterious disappearance. It has inspired countless books, movies, television shows, and works of art, each offering its own interpretation of what happened to the ship and its crew. In addition to Arthur Conan Doyle's short story, the Mary Celeste has been featured in films such as The Ghost Ship, 1943, The Mary Celeste, 1935, and Ghost Ship, 2002, as well as in television shows like The X-Files, Doctor Who, and Unsolved Mysteries. Each of these adaptations takes liberties with the facts, adding supernatural elements or fictional characters to enhance the mystery. The 1935 film, The Mary Celeste, starring Bela Lugosi, portrays the crew as being killed by a mad scientist, while the 2002 film, Ghost Ship, uses the Mary Celeste as a backdrop for a horror story about a haunted ship. The Mary Celeste has also been the subject of numerous documentaries, which have explored the various theories and evidence surrounding the mystery. These documentaries feature interviews with historians, marine archaeologists, and experts in maritime history who discuss the different theories and offer their own insights into what might have happened. The Mary Celeste has become a symbol of the unknown dangers of the sea, a reminder that even in an age of advanced technology, the ocean still holds secrets that we cannot explain. The mystery of the Mary Celeste has also captured the public imagination because it touches on some of our deepest fears and curiosities. We are fascinated by the idea of a ship that is fully intact, yet completely abandoned, because it challenges our understanding of the world around us. We want to know what could have caused a group of experienced sailors, led by a cautious captain, to abandon their ship and their families without a trace. We want to believe that there is a rational explanation for their disappearance, but we also can't help but be drawn to the more supernatural theories, ghosts, curses, and extraterrestrial abduction, because they offer a sense of wonder and mystery that is missing from our everyday lives. The Mary Celeste reminds us that there are still things in the world that we cannot explain, and that the unknown can be both terrifying and exhilarating. It also taps into our fear of being lost at sea, of being cut off from civilization and left to the mercy of the ocean. For many people, the Mary Celeste represents the ultimate maritime nightmare. A ship that is safe and sound, but whose crew has vanished without a trace. To truly understand the Mary Celeste's enduring fascination, we must also consider the historical context in which it disappeared. The 19th century was a time of great maritime exploration and trade, but it was also a time of great danger. Sailors faced countless threats at sea. Storms, piracy, disease, and accidents were common, and many ships never returned to port. The Mary Celeste's disappearance was not unique in that sense, but it was unique in its circumstances. The ship was intact, fully provisioned, and there was no sign of struggle or distress. This made it stand out from other maritime disasters, and it made people wonder if there was something more sinister at work. During the 19th century, maritime travel was the primary means of transporting goods and people across the Atlantic, and ships were the lifeline of global trade. The disappearance of a well-built, well-crewed ship like the Mary Celeste was unheard of, and it sent shockwaves through the maritime community. Sailors began to fear that the sea held unknown dangers that could not be explained by science or reason, and the Mary Celeste became a cautionary tale about the perils of sailing the Atlantic. Another factor that has contributed to the Mary Celeste's legacy is the fact that it involves a family. Benjamin Briggs' decision to bring his wife and children along on the voyage adds a personal touch to the mystery, making it more tragic and more relatable. We can imagine the fear and confusion that Sarah Briggs must have felt watching her husband and the crew abandon the ship, not knowing what would happen to her and her children. We can imagine the children playing on the deck, unaware that this would be their last day alive. This personal element makes the Mary Celeste's mystery more than just a maritime puzzle. It makes it a human tragedy, one that touches our hearts and makes us wonder what could have happened to those poor souls. Sarah Briggs was a devoted wife and mother, and her half-finished letter to her mother, found on the ship, is a poignant reminder of the human cost of the mystery. The letter, which was never sent, talks about her life on the ship, her children's adventures, and her excitement about reaching Genoa. It ends abruptly, mid-sentence, suggesting that she was interrupted by something sudden and unexpected. Over the years, Many people have claimed to have seen the Mary Celeste sailing the Atlantic, even after it was sunk in 1889. These sightings have fueled the legend of the ghost ship, with many people believing that the Mary Celeste is cursed, and that its ghost continues to sail the seas, searching for its missing crew. While these sightings are likely the result of misidentification or imagination, they have helped to keep the Mary Celeste's mystery alive, ensuring that it will never be forgotten. The Mary Celeste has become a part of maritime folklore, a story that is passed down from generation to generation, and it continues to inspire new theories and new interpretations. One of the most famous sightings occurred in 1910, when a British ship spotted a gray brigantine adrift in the Atlantic, with no crew on board. The ship's captain reported that the brigantine looked exactly like the Mary Celeste, with the same distinctive hull and sails. When the British ship approached, the brigantine vanished, leading many to believe that it was the ghost of the Mary Celeste. Another sighting occurred in 1940 during World War II, when a U.S. Navy ship spotted a ship adrift in the Atlantic, which they identified as the Mary Celeste. Again, when they approached, the ship vanished without a trace. In recent years, there have been several attempts to solve the Mary Celeste's mystery using modern technology. In 2019, a team of researchers from the University of Southampton used computer simulations to recreate the Mary Celeste's final voyage, hoping to determine what could have caused the crew to abandon the ship. The simulations showed that a combination of factors, including a leak in the alcohol cargo, strong winds, and a slight list in the ship, could have led the crew to fear that the ship would sink, prompting them to abandon it in the lifeboat. The simulations also showed that the lifeboat could have drifted away quickly, making it impossible for the crew to return to the ship. While this simulation provides a plausible explanation, it still lacks concrete evidence, and it does not explain why the crew left their personal belongings behind. The researchers noted that the crew may have been in a state of panic, which would explain why they left their belongings behind. But there is no evidence to support this claim. The simulations also showed that the ship would have remained afloat for weeks, which is consistent with the fact that the Mary Celeste was found adrift and intact. Another recent attempt to solve the mystery was made by the author and historian Paul Begg, who wrote a book titled The Mary Celeste, The True Story of the Ghost Ship. Begg spent years researching the Mary Celeste, examining historical records, interviews, and evidence from the scene, and he concluded that the most likely explanation was that the crew had been killed by a combination of toxic fumes and panic. Begg argued that the denatured alcohol had leaked, releasing toxic fumes that made the crew disoriented and confused, and that they had abandoned the ship in a state of panic, not realizing that the ship was still safe. Begg also noted that the crew's personal belongings were left behind because they had left in such a hurry, and that the missing lifeboat had capsized in the rough seas, killing everyone on board. While Begg's theory is well researched and plausible, it still cannot be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Begg also suggested that the crew may have been exposed to methanol fumes, which can cause blindness and confusion, but there is no evidence of this on the ship. Additionally, the crew was experienced enough to recognize the signs of toxic fumes and would have taken steps to protect themselves. Despite all these attempts to solve the mystery, the Mary Celeste remains an enigma. No one knows for sure what happened to Benjamin Briggs, his wife and children, and the 7 crew members of the Mary Celeste. They may have died at sea, lost in the vastness of the Atlantic, or they may have been rescued by another ship and started new lives under new names. They may have been killed by pirates, by toxic fumes, by a storm, or by some other unknown danger. Whatever happened to them, their story has become a part of history, a mystery that continues to captivate the world. The families of the crew members were left devastated by their disappearance, and many spent years searching for answers. Sarah Briggs' mother, for example, spent the rest of her life hoping that her daughter and grandchildren would be found alive. But she never received any news. The crew's families also faced financial hardship, as many of them relied on the sailors' wages to support their families. The Mary Celeste's story also serves as a reminder of the dangers of the sea and the courage of the sailors who navigated it in the 19th century. These sailors faced countless hardships and dangers, yet they continued to sail, driven by a sense of adventure, a desire to provide for their families, and a love of the ocean. The Mary Celeste's crew was no different. They were hardworking, experienced men who had dedicated their lives to the sea, and their disappearance was a tragedy that touched the lives of many people. During the 19th century, sailors often spent months or even years at sea, away from their families, and they faced constant threats, including scurvy, storms, and piracy. Despite these dangers, they continued to sail because it was their livelihood and their passion. The Mary Celeste's crew was made up of men who had chosen a life at sea, and they were well aware of the risks. But they never could have imagined that their final voyage would end in such a mysterious way. To delve deeper into the Mary Celeste story, it is important to examine the lives of the people who were on board, as their personalities and backgrounds may provide clues about their fate. Benjamin Briggs was a man of great integrity and caution, and he was deeply devoted to his family. He had spent his entire life at sea, and he knew the dangers of the ocean better than most. He would not have abandoned his ship unless he believed that his family and crew were in immediate danger. Sarah Briggs was a loving wife and mother, and she was known for her calm and gentle nature. She had never been to sea before, but she trusted her husband implicitly, and she was excited about the voyage to Genoa. She was also a skilled seamstress, and her sewing machine and half-finished projects found on the ship are a testament to her creativity and dedication to her family. The couple's children, Sophia and Arthur, were young and innocent, and they saw the voyage as an adventure. Sophia was a curious child who loved to explore the ship, while Arthur was a playful toddler who enjoyed playing on the deck. The crew of the Mary Celeste was made up of experienced sailors, many of whom had sailed with Captain Briggs before. They were hardworking, reliable men, and there was no indication of any conflict between them. The fact that all of these people vanished without a trace makes their disappearance even more tragic and mysterious. Another important aspect of the Mary Celeste story is the impact that it had on maritime law and safety. After the Mary Celeste's disappearance, maritime authorities began to implement new safety measures to prevent similar tragedies. Ships were required to carry more lifeboats, and crew members were trained in emergency procedures. The investigation into the Mary Celeste also highlighted the importance of proper cargo handling, especially for flammable materials like denatured alcohol. Maritime authorities began to require that flammable cargo be stored in sealed containers, and that ships carry proper ventilation systems to prevent the buildup of fumes. Additionally, ships were required to carry more emergency supplies, including distress signals and first aid kits. While these measures were not directly caused by the Mary Celeste's disappearance, they were influenced by the mystery and the desire to prevent future disasters. The Mary Celeste story also led to changes in the way that salvage rights were handled. As the case of the Day Gracious crew raised questions about the ethics of claiming salvage rights for an abandoned ship, the Mary Celeste's mystery has also had a significant impact on popular culture, inspiring countless works of fiction, nonfiction, and art. In addition to Arthur Conan Doyle's short story, the Mary Celeste has been featured in novels, poems, songs, and even video games. It has become a symbol of the supernatural, and it is often associated with ghosts, curses, and other paranormal phenomena. The Mary Celeste has also been the subject of numerous documentaries and television programs, which have explored the various theories and evidence surrounding the mystery. These works have helped to keep the Mary Celeste's story alive, ensuring that it will never be forgotten. One of the most famous novels inspired by the Mary Celeste is The Ghost Ship by Richard Middleton, which tells the story of a young sailor who encounters the ghost of the Mary Celeste and uncovers the truth about its crew's disappearance. The Mary Celeste has also been featured in poems by poets such as Rudyard Kipling and Edgar Allan Poe, who were fascinated by the mystery and the sense of tragedy surrounding the ship. One of the most interesting aspects of the Mary Celeste's mystery is the way that it has evolved over time. As new technologies and new theories emerge, our understanding of the mystery changes, and new possibilities are considered. What was once considered a far-fetched theory, like extraterrestrial abduction, has been replaced by more scientific theories, like the toxic fume theory or the microburst theory. However, none of these theories have been proven, and the mystery remains unsolved. This evolution of the mystery is a testament to the enduring fascination of the Mary Celeste, and it shows that people will continue to search for the truth about what happened to the ship and its crew. In the early 20th century, for example, the focus was on piracy and mutiny. But as more evidence was uncovered, these theories were dismissed. In the mid-20th century, the focus shifted to natural causes, like storms and seaquakes, and in recent years, the focus has been on scientific explanations, like toxic fumes and microbursts. Despite these changes, the core mystery remains the same. Why did the crew abandon a perfectly good ship without a trace? Another interesting aspect of the Mary Celeste story is the way that it has been used to explore larger themes, such as the power of nature, the fragility of human life, and the limits of human knowledge. The Mary Celeste reminds us that no matter how advanced our technology becomes, we are still at the mercy of the natural world. It also reminds us that there are some things that we may never understand, and that the unknown can be both terrifying and awe-inspiring. The Mary Celeste story is a reminder that we are all small in the face of the vastness of the universe, and that there is still much to learn about the world around us. It also explores the theme of human curiosity, as people have spent over 150 years trying to solve the mystery, driven by a desire to understand the unknown. The Mary Celeste story is a testament to the power of human curiosity and the lengths that people will go to uncover the truth. In recent years, there has been a growing interest in the Mary Celeste among amateur researchers and enthusiasts who have formed online communities dedicated to solving the mystery. These communities share information, debate theories, and conduct their own research, hoping to uncover new clues about the Mary Celeste's fate. While these amateur researchers may not have the resources of professional historians or archaeologists, they have made important contributions to our understanding of the mystery, and they have helped to keep the Mary Celeste's story alive. Many of these enthusiasts have spent years researching historical records, old newspapers, and ship logs, looking for any clues that might have been missed by previous investigators. Some have even traveled to the Azores and Gibraltar to visit the locations associated with the Mary Celeste story, hoping to find new evidence. These amateur researchers have also created websites and social media groups dedicated to the Mary Celeste, where they share their findings and discuss their theories with other enthusiasts. One of the most recent developments in the Mary Celeste's mystery is the discovery of new historical documents that shed light on the ship's past. In 2019, a team of researchers from the University of Liverpool discovered a series of letters written by Benjamin Briggs to his family, which provided new insights into his personality and his plans for the voyage. The letters showed that Briggs was excited about the voyage to Genoa, and that he was looking forward to returning home to his family. They also showed that Briggs was concerned about the safety of his family, and that he had taken extra precautions to ensure their safety on the voyage. For example, he had stocked the ship with extra food and water, and he had hired an experienced crew that he trusted. These letters do not provide any new clues about the crew's disappearance, but they do humanize the story, making it more relatable and more tragic. The letters also show that Briggs was a loving husband and father who cared deeply about his family, which makes his disappearance even more heartbreaking. Another recent discovery was the identification of the remains of one of the Mary Celeste's crew members. In 2020, a team of archaeologists discovered a skeleton in a grave in Gibraltar, which was believed to be that of John Wright, one of the Mary Celeste's seamen. The skeleton was identified using DNA testing, and it showed signs of trauma, which suggested that Wright had died a violent death. However, there is no evidence to link Wright's death to the Mary Celeste's disappearance, and it is possible that he died in a separate incident. This discovery has sparked new interest in the Mary Celeste's mystery, and it has led some researchers to revisit the theory that the crew was murdered. However, most historians believe that the skeleton is not related to the Mary Celeste's crew, as there is no evidence that any of the crew members were buried in Gibraltar. The skeleton was later determined to be that of a sailor who had died in a bar fight in Gibraltar in 1873, which was unrelated to the Mary Celeste. Despite these new discoveries, the Mary Celeste's mystery remains unsolved. No one knows for sure what happened to the ship's crew, and it is likely that we will never know. However, this does not diminish the importance of the Mary Celeste story. It is a story that reminds us of the dangers of the sea, the courage of sailors, and the power of the unknown. It is a story that has captivated the world for over 150 years, and it will continue to captivate us for many more years to come.